I start in Slovak with a small announcement. Taká informácia pre vás, tí, čo budete potrebovať preklad, tak nalaďte si na vašich zariadeniach druhý kanál. Takže na druhom kanáli bude preklad z angličtiny do slovenčiny. Ak kto nemá sluchátka, tak myslím, že sú k dispozícii niekde vzadu. Okay, so now I'm switching to English. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to this face-to-face talk with very inspiring and interesting person. Without long speech, I would like to, and I have the honor to introduce you, astronaut from NASA, Dorothy Metcalf-Lindenburger. Welcome here, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dorothy, first I would like to ask you, how do you do that? Because yesterday I saw on my Czech friends' Facebook that you have some lecture in Prague and then in Brno. Tomorrow morning I turn on the radio and you were there. And then I saw some pictures from University of Economy and then from Slovak newspaper and media. And now you are here. Yeah. So how you do that? Your schedule on Earth is more challenging than in the space station, isn't it?
Well, I have been very busy the last few days. I can't do this every day, 12 hours a day, but I thought it was a good opportunity to come to a part of the world that I haven't been to before and meet new people. I always like to meet new people and see places that are so beautiful and that I've read about but haven't had a chance to see. So I can put in 12-hour days for about a week and a half, and then I'll go home and sleep.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to beginning, because everybody here knows that you are a former astronaut, former NASA astronaut. But before we'll start talking about your space mission, I'm really curious how this all started.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to show a few slides just to give you a visual, especially since we have some kids in the audience, because it started when I was a little girl, and Sally Ride flew as the first American woman in space, and of course this is 20 years after Valentina Tereshkova flew, but this is a really big deal to be 8 or 9 years old and realize it's possible for an American girl to become an astronaut. But I started dreaming about it about that age, but it took some teachers. I had a really good science teacher, Mr. Jordan, who had confidence in me as a scientist and allowed me to go present a project. I lived in Colorado, and I went to California to present this project, so that was a big deal to get to travel in an airplane to go present your science project, and I really credit having good teachers. And then I also had this opportunity to go to Space Academy, and it was April of 1990 when I was a 9th grader, so about 15 years old. And at Space Academy for a whole week, we lived in a dorm that kind of looked like the space station, and we did simulations, we were on the space shuttle, and I got to practice doing a spacewalk. So it felt more real, and I felt well, maybe this is possible. So that's how it all started.
So from the little child, you always want to go where no man has gone before, yeah?
Yes.
Yes. I also read that your favorite movie, or your parents bring you to the cinema to see the movie The Right Stuff. It is also my favorite movie. It is a story about the first American astronauts, the famous Mercury 7. And astronauts are usually picked up from test pilots from, for example, US Navy, US Air Force. But your story is quite different. You have been the high school teacher. How it is possible that? How does a teacher get from school classrooms to the NASA astronaut training program.
Yes, so I think I can skip ahead a few slides. So I went to college and I studied science because I knew that astronauts had to study science. And really it was my goal to not just study at undergraduate, but to get a master's and a PhD in geology. And I wanted to take a small break, though, to go explore the world and learn a little bit about myself. So I signed up for the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps was going to send me to Kazakhstan to teach English at a university. But Kazakhstan pulled away from Russia right when all of this was happening. So I didn't get to go and be a part of Peace Corps in Kazakhstan, which also meant that I had not applied to graduate school. So I was really upset because I didn't know, like, here is my dream, and now I felt like I'd really taken a sidetrack on my dream. But I decided if I was going to teach English in Kazakhstan, why not try to teach science in America? And so I became a science teacher in a small school, well, not too small, but in a school in Washington State. And one of my students asked, how do you go to the bathroom in space? And I've discovered this is a very popular question for all astronauts, but I didn't know as a teacher how you went to the bathroom in space. I had some ideas, but I didn't know exactly what it looked like. So I researched it, and in researching that question, I found the answer of how I could get back to being an astronaut. And the answer was they were hiring teachers as part of the class of 2004. So we had tried this with NASA before. Back in 1986, we had flown Krista McAuliffe as part of a space shuttle mission. But unfortunately, this mission is the one that exploded, the Challenger. And so we never had that teacher in space. So the goal was then to have some teachers go to space, and Krista McAuliffe's backup, Barbara Morgan, went first, and then there were 3 of us that were hired as teachers. So it was really kind of lucky, right? Like a student being curious, how do you go to the bathroom in space, led me to find out an answer that actually answered the question I wanted to answer with my life. Like, I want to go to space.
This is very interesting how these little things, these little triggers can change your life forever. Did you thank this child, this kid, for asking you this question?
You know, I wish that the story had a completely happy ending. Unfortunately, this student dropped out of school. So that made me very sad, because the whole reason I was answering this question is I wanted to keep her involved. I wanted her to see that her questions mattered. But there's a lot of struggles, as we all know, and my hope is that she went back to school someday, or that she's doing something that she's enjoying. But I never got a chance to thank her.
That's a pity. I saw on the picture there was some model of space shuttle.
Oh yes, if we go back a little bit. Yes.
What is
this opportunity to go to space camp and my dream, I built this model of Discovery and I hung it in my bedroom, and it's still there today. That's kind of sad.
So you build one and then you fly one.
That's right. So as I like to tell students, almost 20 years to the day after going to space camp, I flew on Discovery. So I think it is not just a chance. Like, I think it was meant that I get to fly 20 years later on a vehicle that has the name Discovery, which is just, I think, what we do in space. We discover.
Little back, you sent your application to NASA in 2003. I don't know if it's right.
That's right.
This was also the same year when the space shuttle Columbia crashed during the landing procedure. All crew members died. Did this incident somehow influence you? Also, the first teacher astronaut, died during the launch of the space shuttle Challenger, as you said. You had a good job, a good husband, a beautiful child. Were you not afraid? Why were you, as a young woman, willing to undertake this kind of risk?
Yes, so like I said, when Challenger exploded, I was in the 5th or 6th grade, and I really remember this because I wanted to watch it. I thought it was really amazing that we were sending a teacher into space, and I had been watching all the shuttle missions, so I really wanted to watch. And it was during school, so we were all watching, and then this horrible accident happened. And I went home and I had a really good talk with my mom because I asked her about, like, you know, how do you make sense of this, that 7 people, like, that I want to go to space, like, they all just died. And she said, well, you know, the year before my grandmother had died from cancer, and she said, you know, everyone is going to die. So do you think grandmother had a good life? And I thought about it. Yes, grandma had done all the things she had wanted to do. And she's like, do you think that these people had a good life? And I thought, yes, they did all have a good life, and they were doing something that they wanted. So she's like, you know, what are you going to do? And I think that's a really good point. Like, I could try to be safe all the time, but then I wouldn't do anything, and I would just be in my house, and I wouldn't meet new people, and I wouldn't climb mountains. Or you can take risks, and you're not guaranteed that you're going to survive these risks, but you are guaranteed that you will have lived a full life. And so I would hope for all people that you would take the risk so that you will live a full life.
Ďakujeme. Do future astronauts need to be good in mathematics and physics? What are the criteria for being selected as an astronaut? What would you recommend to future Slovak astronaut applicants?
Yes. So, yes, you do need to study advanced math. You don't have to be a mathematician or a physicist, but we hire also physicists and mathematicians. I was good in math, but I'm not the greatest mathematician. The level that I got to use when I was actually an astronaut was not what you study in calculus or things like that, but you use math on a daily basis, and it's just like some of it is quick math that you have to do as a pilot, calculating fuel ratios and doing geometry for the ratios that you need to like rendezvous and things like that. So it's not super difficult math, but it's really important math. If you want to design rockets, that's when you really need to know your math. But all of us have to have studied it, as well as physics and chemistry. My suggestion, if you're a young person out there that wants to be an astronaut, is to pick either math, science, engineering, something that you're interested and passionate about, and just put your heart into it. And like, I love geology, so I put my heart into it, and as a geologist I have to know physics and chemistry and math and the past and the present. So yeah, that's my suggestion.
You have been selected as an astronaut from among 8,000 applicants. Yeah,
something like that. I think it was maybe more like 6,000, but yes.
Yeah. I read 8,000. Yeah. This is a really, really huge number. How many teachers were selected into the NASA astronaut training program from these 8 or 6,000?
Yes, so I'll fast forward a couple of pictures, because right now one of my friends who is a former high school teacher is on orbit, or he's a former middle school teacher. Joe Akaba was also a geologist, and he was teaching in Florida when he was hired to be an astronaut, and he's flown in space. This is his 3rd time. So he flew on a shuttle, and then this is his 2nd mission to the International Space Station via a Soyuz. And then my friend Ricky Arnold is also a teacher, and he will fly next spring for his 2nd time. So they hired 3 of us that were teachers, and then, like I said, Krista McAuliffe's backup, Barbara Morgan, was also selected.
From 8,000, yeah. It's very nice success, yeah. What was astronaut training like? Can you please share a few details with us? We know from movies that astronauts have to train in the pools and flying in the jets. Does that apply to all of them? What else do you have to do? Do NASA astronauts also have to learn Russian or any European language?
Yes, so, well, we start out with our training, and we do survival training. And it's because we fly in these planes, and so they want to make sure that we would feel comfortable if we had some sort of accident. So we start out this was in Maine, and sometimes we run scenarios. Of course, no one really got hurt. It was just pretend, but it helps us think through scenarios. So we helped carry out one of our friends from equipment that we could pull together and make a stretcher. And then we do water survival training, and this is in Pensacola, Florida. And this is perhaps my least favorite day because they strap you into a helicopter like this, and then they dunk you into the water, and you have to wait until it rolls over, and then they let you escape. And you do this not just once, but you have to do it 3 times. So this is not my favorite thing, but it's actually good to remember that if you are in a serious situation, how to be calm and how to think yourself through it and get out. And we then finally get to do some flight training. We start out, like kids, we start out on a slower airplane so that we're not jumping right into the jet. So we started out on the prop plane and even got to do some flights in the front seat with an instructor behind us. And then eventually we do jet training. So this is what the Air Force and Navy use to train their test pilots. It's a T-38, a training jet. And there's always a pilot in the front seat, of course, that has gone through test pilot school. And then as a mission specialist, I was always in the back seat. But I did learn how to fly and do the communication and navigation, which prepares you for space flight because you're using checklists, and you always have to think through the mission before you go do the mission, right? You have to think about weather and where you're going to land, how much fuel you have. So it's a really good way to train. And then eventually we finally do some classroom training, and then we do simulator training. So a lot of time is spent in a simulator where we can practice on the displays, like what we'll really see in space, but more importantly, the instructors can throw in failures. They can throw in lots of failures and make everything seem like the vehicle's going to explode. And again, they're trying to test you to see, like, what's that threshold that you feel comfortable at and that you can operate and use your checklist to help solve the problems. So this is like everyone goes through this. Each of us has to learn how to be the pilot and the commander, even though we won't be the pilot and commander. We each have to learn about that position. And we all do have to do training in other mock-ups and also with the robotic training so that we can fly robotic arms. And then, yes, we all go through spacewalk training. So this is my first spacewalk training just after I had my daughter. So my daughter is just a few months old there. But we train in a large swimming pool. You can see there's a diver behind us that's a safety diver. But we use the pool because, of course, it makes us neutrally buoyant, and so we can work there for several hours. And then, yes, absolutely, we do Russian training right now. We have to have a proficiency so that we could carry on conversations and understand how their vehicle works.
Very interesting. Have you been trained for eventuality of dying or something like that? Because you have said that something might blow up, yeah? So did you train these kind of things? How to...
Well, they never take it to the point where the vehicle completely blows up. I mean, they usually stop. We could get ourselves into a situation where we didn't make the right decision based on the failures, but it seems a little bit counterproductive to completely demoralize your astronauts. So, that's a good time to stop the simulator and say, okay, hey, why didn't you catch that failure that put you into this situation. So the simulator is about learning, and yes, it's about pushing you to get better and understand how the systems work, but it's also not about like demoralizing or making you feel like you failed. And of course, though, we know like some of the best learning does take place when you make mistakes, and so being able to talk about your mistakes and understand how you made those mistakes and you went down the wrong pathway so that you won't do it again. Yeah.
In 2006, your astronaut training ended. Did you already know at that point when you will be able to fly on a space mission?
No, we graduated and had finished all of our training, but you know, because of the Columbia accident in 2003, we're still waiting to find out if we were going to have return to flight. And then there were several 60 astronauts at least that needed to fly in front of us. So we were at the really far end of this. This gave us time, like that gave me time to start my family. So I had my daughter. But it also gave us time to do more advanced training. We went to Canada to do some additional robotic arm training, more time in the swimming pool. We helped support shuttle launches so that our flight in a shuttle wouldn't be the first time that we were around the shuttle, so we helped support those launches. So there's a lot of things that we did in those years while we were waiting for our own flights. And we didn't even know maybe we wouldn't get to fly in space, but it was really nice that our boss made sure that all of us at one point got assigned to a flight.
What did you feel when the phone rang with the news?
Well, at first, I thought I was in trouble because there's a backstory. One time I was helping with a shuttle launch, and we tried to take the families to a viewing room of the control center, but the viewing room was locked, and so I called my friend on console, and I said, hey, I have the wife and son of the commander. He's docking to the space station. I'd really like them to see, but I can't get in upstairs. And he was like, oh, just come on the main floor. So I came on the main floor with all the flight controllers. And the next day, I got a phone call from my boss, and he was like, what were you doing on the floor of the main control room? You're never supposed to do that, because if something happened, we wouldn't want the families to be right there, in the heat of all the people trying to control it. We never do that. And I was like, I know. I tried to get in upstairs, but it was locked. So I thought when I first got this call, oh no, what did I do this time? Like what rule did I break? But really, Steve Lindsay was calling me to tell me that I was going to be a part of the STS-131 crew. So that was awesome.
What did your husband say to this?
Yeah, I think, I don't remember exactly what he said when I finally got the position. I remember when I first got hired, he was really excited. He was the first person I called after, I found out while I was teaching my 9th graders, so I was jumping up and down, and then I was like, oh, I got to call my husband. And so he was really excited to find out, probably because I talk about it all the time. So he's probably like, oh, just make her stop talking about it and do something already. But I think, he's always been very supportive, and I know that he knew it was my big dream, so I think he just was probably excited too.
As you have said, your mission was STS-131, the Space Shuttle Discovery to the International Space Station. What were the main goals of this mission?
Yeah, so we were bringing up a big module full of equipment because we were the 4th to last flight, so we had to leave supplies on the space station so that it would be ready for the next year and a half while we waited for commercial vehicles that would supply the space station to come online. So we took up like a bedroom for a crew member, it looks like a closet, but it's really like where they hang their sleeping bag and they sleep and they have a computer and all those things. So we brought one of those up. We brought up a lot of scientific equipment. We actually brought up a thing called the sabatier, which uses the process that the French scientists invented, which is to take the carbon dioxide and hydrogen and turn it into methane and water. And that was important for a life cycle piece that we needed on the space station. And then we brought up lots of food and clothing, all these things that you need to supply the space station.
There were 7 astronauts on board
Yes.
Space Shuttle Discovery on this mission. I read that your role was mission specialist. What is it about?
Yes, so I'll kind of explain the different people on our crew. Before you can become a commander, you have to have been a pilot. So the commander, Ellen Poindexter, had been a pilot for a previous mission, and they brought up the Columbus Space Module, which is the European Space Agency's laboratory. And so Alan Poindexter was our commander, and he had flown for the Navy. And then our pilot, Jim Dutton, was it was his first flight. He's one of my classmates, and he flew for the Air Force. And while their first job, of course, is to help get the vehicle into space and home, they also have many other jobs when they're up on the mission as well. The commander, of course, wants to oversee the whole mission, make sure everything goes right. But like Jim, my friend, was also, he operated a robotic arm, and he helped me get our crew members out the hatch for the spacewalks. We had 2 spacewalkers. Rick Mastracchio was our EV1, and Clay Anderson was our EV2, and they had 3 spacewalks that they did because another part of our mission was bringing up an ammonia tank, and this ammonia helps cool the outside of the space station, so that was very important. And both of them had already done spacewalks together before on a previous mission, so they were bringing a lot of experience to the team. And then Stephanie Wilson is an engineer, and she had also already flown multiple times in space, and she's really good with robotic arms, so she was like in charge of all robotic arm operations. But Stephanie helped with the rendezvous with the space station, and she was like also really good at helping move a lot of equipment. She's very fast and efficient. And Naoko Yamazaki is one of my classmates from Japan, and she also was in charge of all of our moving operations. So every bag has to go to an exact spot on the space station so people can find it, because every bag is white and has a tiny label, and so you have to put it in the right space so that everyone will know. But of course that space is already occupied by something, so she kept a track of like all the things that were moving and then all the trash that we were picking up so that things could transfer correctly. So she was really good. And then myself, I did a lot of odd jobs. So I was a flight engineer. I sat behind the commander and pilot and helped during launch and entry. But I was also a robotic arm operator. I helped with the spacewalks, even though I didn't do a spacewalk. Like, I was in charge of talking to them all of the time they were outside and making sure they were safe, making sure they did all the right bolt turns, make sure that they got to the right spot, and didn't miss something. And then I was a mover, and I was a trash collector too.
So now you are sitting, yeah?
Yeah.
So please try to imagine the moment when you were sitting on the top of the space shuttle, which has on the launch maybe or approximately 2 million kilograms weight. So what was your feelings when the rocket motors started to rumbling, and what did you think? We are gonna die or something like that?
No, but I wasn't expecting the big punch that you get in the back either, because they can't make that in the simulator. So just imagine that you are tilted on your back, because that's how you sit in the space shuttle. You're on your back, and you've been waiting there for 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, because they have to make sure everyone's cleared from the pad, all the people that helped get you into the vehicle, and then they also have to make sure the vehicle's doing okay, so all this communication with it. Then they have to make sure that we are doing okay, so they have us do some comm checks and make sure everyone can be heard and they can see us. And then finally you're ready, and you get your weather check, and you're really ready. And the main engines light, and they go through a gimbal sequence, and so you kind of shift back and forth. And after that, literally, you get the biggest smack in the back that you've ever had. And then I don't know how many of you have ridden a wooden roller coaster. It has to be wooden. It can't be any other type of roller coaster. Okay, there's some daring people out there. So in a wooden roller coaster, it's really jerky. That is the first 2 minutes of the flight. It's like really bouncy, and you like jerk back and forth. And that's because the solid rockets are, they don't gimbal really smoothly. They kind of pulse, and so it pulses you. But 2.5 minutes later, those solids fall back into the ocean, and then you're on a pretty smooth ride. It's just burning through the main engines hydrogen and oxygen. And about 1 minute before the engines shut off, you start to accelerate so fast that you're accelerating 3 times gravity. So you feel that through your chest. It feels like someone is sitting on you and pushing you back into your chair. And it's really annoying, and you want to hit them and get them off. And right when you feel like you can't take it anymore, you're in space. So that's an 8.5 minute rocket ride.
When you first saw the Earth from space, we are in the orbit right now, and you are looking at the Earth from space first time. Were you impressed? Because many astronauts talking about this being a life-changing experience to see the humanity, the whole world from these heights.
So the very first time I saw Earth was after this 8.5 minutes. You're kind of looking down at Earth, and we're looking at Europe. That part seemed very surreal to me because we had just been in Florida, and like, how can 8.5 minutes later can you be in Europe? And I didn't really get to contemplate that because I had a series of things that we have to do, including a burn, that all take a lot of time. So I didn't really get to think about like this whole being in space and looking at Earth. But later that evening, I finally got time to look out the window, and I was just in so much awe. I think because, you know, here on Earth, it's really beautiful, right? We see beautiful sunrises and sunsets. We see stars and the Milky Way and the moon. And in space, you see that, but then you get to see down on much larger areas, like thousands of miles, and see the curvature of the Earth, but also see it in comparison to the stark darkness of space. And that is like, wow, we are like this fragile spaceship with people on it, and that's really amazing to me. So I think it's kind of, yes, in a way life-changing, because you think about how much more meaning it is to be connected to those 7.5 billion people. Like, that is everyone's home, despite the fact that we all say, like, I live in this country or I live here. Really, we live on Earth, and we live on and occupy a space on Earth, but we live on Earth, and that makes, I think it makes you feel responsible for taking care of Earth as well.
Okay, so now we are in space, and we are approaching the space station. I read that you prefer not to look out of the window when the space shuttle was approaching to the space station. The price of the space shuttle mission is about $450 million, and the price tag of International Space Station is approximately $550 billion. Yeah. So I would be very nervous if I will be piloting the space shuttle against this colossus. So yeah, it is a great responsibility.
Yeah.
What did you feel?
So I'm glad I didn't know how much it costs exactly at that time. No, you know, we took our job very seriously when we were doing it, and our commander was just really great at flying the approach for the rendezvous. And my friend Naoko and I, our job was to like literally pull these two vehicles together with hooks, and we practiced this over and over. And in the simulator, you would look at the station and you'd watch it, but the real day, when I looked at the space station, it was so close and so bright and kind of distracting that I realized if I kept looking at it, I might not do my job like right. So I stopped looking at it and made sure I only focused on like what I was responsible for, so I wouldn't think about it and get distracted. And then after we were finally, firmly attached to each other and safely pressurized, then I looked out and I was really impressed at how beautiful both of these vehicles are.
I envy you. Your crew spent 15 days on orbit or in the station. How was your life in the station? What kind of difficult task your crew or you personally did you have to do? Did something unexpected happen, some alarm or something like that?
So we had, right from the launch, we had something unexpected happen. We're supposed to have a high data rate antenna that sends back to Earth like video and pictures and all this important data. And our high rate antenna broke. Actually, like a transistor, they think just failed, and that was like what we found out later. But anyway, it meant that we couldn't send data back and forth, like high data rate. So it was good that we fly paper checklists, and we actually had like the first few days of checklists on paper, because then the person on the ground that we call the capsule communicator, they had to read us changes and we'd have to write it down. But you can imagine if we didn't have it printed out, like that would take forever. So at least we had like the things that needed to be changed, and it wasn't a lot. So that was our first failure. And of course, it was really good that we were going to the space station, because then we could share their high data rate antennas and get our information down to the ground and have an exchange. The second big failure happened on one of our spacewalks. With this ammonia tank that we were bringing up, it only has 4 big bolts, so how hard could 4 big bolts be to drive? But surprisingly, because the back of the ammonia tank is all metal, and because we work like in a partially shaded area, the temperature difference warped the metal, and we couldn't get the 4 bolts to like seat correctly and drive in. So my friend Rick had to hold the ammonia tank for 45 minutes, like so that it was all shaded and it all got cold. And then this is why it was good to have Clay and Rick, because Clay had played football, and so Clay took the ammonia tank and just like literally shoved it into the space station, and it worked. Then we were able to get all 4 bolts in. So it's kind of like when your computer won't work, power cycle it. This is like our power cycle. But that took some time. It ended up changing one of our spacewalks. So when that happens, the people down on Earth that are engineers for spacewalking, they go and they have to like literally, I think, work 24 hours around the clock, and they wrote up a new spacewalk. Then they sent it up to us, and then we executed it without practicing it in the water, which I think shows like it's really good training that we get back on Earth. So astronauts are kind of like just the visible people of the space program, but really all these like trainers and engineers are the people that should be celebrated, because they're the ones that like tell us what to do. So they did a good job.
I read that you were helping your colleagues during the EVAs, the extravehicular activities. What was this job about?
Yeah, so the job that I had is all about talking and knowing all the spacewalks that they're doing. So I practiced them in the water. I was their backup. I knew all the jobs that they were doing, and then I literally talked them through it, not because they didn't know it, but because it helps keep you in an even pace, and you don't work too fast, because if you work too fast, you could like burn out all your energy, and a spacewalk is about 6.5 to 7 hours, and so you need people to be evenly paced. Also, like I have a big picture of what's going on, so I said that we needed robotic arm support, and Jim and Stephanie are in a different module, and so I'm talking to them, making sure that everything is synced up, and like, they don't hit the crew members with the robotic arm or something that would be really bad. So it's just like the job is to be kind of like the big picture, situationally aware person. And then we go around the Earth every 90 minutes. And so I also remind them of little things like the sun is rising in 4 minutes. Be ready to put your visor down and turn your glove heaters off and turn your cooling up. And then the same, like when we come from sunshine into darkness, okay, raise your visor, put the heaters on and change your cooling. So it gives me, I'm there to kind of help remind them. And then I can also give them some comic relief or like some reminders to enjoy the spacewalk. So they're out there and they can see the Earth below, and I know where we are above the Earth, so I can tell them if they're coming across their hometown or like what continent is below them. So it can kind of remind them, like, it's not just the little job, it's like you're in this big space too.
Some funny story from space station? You lost something, or I don't know.
So there's a funny story that my colleagues like to tell on me. We were bringing up like special food for our friends on the space station. And I don't usually play practical jokes, but I thought it might be funny to like hide all the food, and then we wouldn't have it to transfer. So I hid it all in my drawer of food because I made room. And then I kind of forgot, and I went off and I was doing other work. And my commander went to transfer this food, and I heard like swear words, and like people were really angry downstairs in the space shuttle. I was like, oh my gosh, that's because of me. And I didn't think that they'd like get like really upset. And so my commander floated up to the flight deck, and he was like, do you know anything about the missing food? And I lied. I was like, no, I don't know anything. But then later, because I was operating the robotic arm, so I didn't want to like be distracted. So it was okay to say no then. But then later I went back and I apologized, and I showed them where the food was, and I explained that it was a joke, and I was sorry that I had lied.
After your space mission, your new job in NASA was so-called Cape Crusader. Right. It was quite similar than when you was helping your colleagues during these EVAs, or?
So it's kind of a cool name, right? Like Cape Crusader, but it's not always that cool. I mean, it's a neat job, and it's a very important job, but we're not out crusading. What we do is, just like in the airplane, when a pilot usually does a walk around, make sure their vehicle is safe, and then also inspects all their switches and circuit breakers. Well, we literally do that for the shuttle, but it takes several days. So we go down days earlier, and we set up the whole vehicle the way the crew that's going to fly wants it. And so that means sometimes like we put tape in specific spots where they need duct tape to use, like for computer cables or things like that. We set up cameras to have it on the right settings so that when they get to space they can take important pictures of the tank and some of the critical photography we need early on in the mission. We also inspect the space suits and make sure they're ready for delivery to the space station for spacewalks. So our job is kind of to be there with the vehicle and be there with the equipment before the actual crew that's going to fly that mission gets on board. And it was really special to be a part of the last 3 flights because these were the last 3 vehicles flying, so I got to say that I had been on each of those vehicles before they were sent to museums, which I'm not sure how I feel about vehicles being sent to museums because it makes me feel kind of old. But it was time. So yeah, that job, it was really nice. It was a way that we could also say goodbye to the workforce that had helped. We had been flying space shuttles for 30 years. And so to be able to say thank you to these people that had dedicated their life, some of them for those 30 years, that was really special.
Yeah, so you were there during these last 3 flights of space shuttle. The last space shuttle flight to space in 2011 and you have retired from NASA in 2014. So what you have been doing during this time, and why you retired? NASA don't pay well? Or?
No, NASA paid well. You know, it was hard to transition from having a vehicle that's that your country owns and can fly lots of people on, you know, 7 people in one flight. And now we only send about 4 Americans a year to space. So that meant that line to get into space got really long with all these people. And it's right when my daughter was around 5, 6 years old. And I knew that the travel that's involved and the training that's involved to get to be on one of those long duration flights takes you away from your family for a long period of time. So it was not an easy decision. It was actually really hard because it's like saying goodbye to a part of you that you worked hard for to achieve. Yet I think at the same time, I mean, at some point, all of us have to walk away from things that we've really enjoyed. Athletes do it, dancers, singers, you know, at some point you can't keep doing the same thing over and over. And there's a new phase of your life. And so it made sense for my family to hit the 10-year mark, say thank you, and then move back to Washington State where we're raising our daughter and we're able to be out backpacking and doing fun things like that too.
So we're talking about the space shuttle program and that it was cancelled in 2011, approximately 1 year after your mission. After this termination of this program, NASA didn't have and still doesn't have any spaceship to launch American astronauts to space station or even further. So NASA must pay for the seats in Russian Soyuz spacecraft right now. Spaceship Orion or manned Dragon is still in some testing phase. So what went wrong? Why NASA is in this situation now?
Well, NASA knew that they'd have to be in this transition situation, and it's really because, you know, tax dollars can only afford to do so much, and no one wants their taxes raised. So you can't have 3 big programs going at the same time, and so to afford building a new vehicle, it was time to retire the space shuttle. And like I said, the space shuttle worked for 30 years, but it kept us in a low Earth orbit, which is good. We learned a lot about our human body and about working in microgravity. But if you want to explore and get beyond Earth, you need to have an exploration vehicle, which cannot look like a shuttle. It needs to be a capsule. And so this, you know, anything that is really difficult usually takes a lot of time and sometimes takes extra time than you can plan for. And that's where we're at right now. In the next year, I would imagine that we would see like the SpaceX vehicle or the Boeing vehicle come online and be ready to take Americans to the space station. They seem to be getting ready and almost to that point. And then the Orion vehicle will also be doing a test flight, unmanned, but it will be, or uncrewed, I should say, but it'll be in the next year or two. And after that test flight, hopefully we are ready to send people on the Orion vehicle. We won't go far at first, like we'll do a safe, you know, test demonstration, but get out beyond low Earth orbit so that we can see that the vehicle works, and then it can come in on a really, you know, steep, hot entry, and that will be good.
Maybe one comment on that. When Eugene Cernan, the last man on the moon, maybe you don't know, but his grandfather was an immigrant from Slovakia. He was in Slovakia a few times. But when he was leaving the Taurus literal volley on the moon, the NASA was talking about the next step is Mars. And the time frame was maybe 20, 30 years, so maybe in the 80s or 90s. But now we are in the situation that we still don't have any good plan for that. what is your opinion about the fact that no humans have left the Earth's orbit since 1972, so it is 45 years now?
Yes, so I really hope that we would have gone back to the moon, just because as a geologist, there's still a lot to do on the moon and to learn there. And it puts you within safe distance, essentially, from the Earth. I mean, it's not really safe, but it's only roughly 3 days away, versus, you know, Mars is like months away with the current technology that we have. But we are where we're at, and so I think when we are able to, we will get out and explore, and we'll get to Mars, and hopefully it'll be in the 2030s, so I'll still be alive, I hope, to see this and witness it, and I think that will be really exciting. Yeah, but it's hard, you know, anything that's hard, like I said, and worth doing sometimes takes a lot more time than we expect.
You are in the advisory board of the Mars Generation initiative. This initiative was founded by the young girl, Abigail Harrison, and she wanted to be the first human to leave the footstep on Mars. Yeah. So can you please tell us more about this initiative and maybe your opinion why we as a humanity have
To go to Mars?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I joined this board for the Mars Generation because the idea is to increase awareness in 13 to 24, 25-year-olds, and to encourage them to think about exploration and think about space, to continue working in their math and science classes, and even to give them scholarships so that they can go to space camp and have those experiences. And it's open to any young people, so anyone can sign up that is between those ages and become a member. And you don't have to do anything, or you can do a lot of things. And the goal is, like, maybe you start a club in your school and you start kind of doing like probably what you did early on, like increasing awareness among your peers about what space flight is and how it works. Then maybe you send a satellite to space. And, you know, it's like bringing awareness and getting people that are smart in dialogue, connecting young people to colleges and professors, internships, all these opportunities that maybe alone you don't know where to start, but when you join a group, like, you can be pointed in the right direction, and then there's people surrounding you with their ideas. So that was kind of the idea. And the reason why I think we should go to Mars is because, of course, we know the Earth has been bombarded by asteroids in the past, so it would kind of be foolish to believe that it wouldn't happen again. And by understanding and going out in our solar system, the technology we develop there, maybe we learn either how to prevent asteroids from coming to Earth, so maybe we learn how to deflect them. But more importantly, we also put an outpost out in space, and, you know, perhaps you cannot save everyone, but at least you can get a start on a new group that's living there. And so also, I just think that, again, when you push yourself in technology, a lot of good things trickle back to the people on Earth. In fact, they don't trickle, they come pretty fast. And thanks to our developments in space, we sitting here have improvements in medicine, in our cell phone technology, in the way we communicate, the computers we have, the software codes that we have. There's so many benefits that we get from space travel. So I don't think it could be a bad thing.
I have many questions about Mars, but our time is running because our audience want to ask questions too. But last question from me is, or two questions, sorry. What is the most important thing that you have learned in space? Because this is the name of this talk. Yeah.
The most important thing that I learned in space is probably just looking at Earth and thinking, this is a beautiful, beautiful place, and a place that I'll always cherish, and am so glad that, you know, that I get a chance to call it home. And so, like, the bigger Earth, that's what I'll always think about.
So what you want to tell to to young space enthusiasts in Slovakia. How can a small country like Slovakia contribute to the space research? And yeah.
Well, like yourself, I think that if you have passion for what you're doing, you find a way to find interest and gather people together and make progress towards the big goals. So I think it's important, like the curiosity that you have, and also pushing towards your big dreams and not giving up, and instead involving more people and getting people interested, because together you can make big things happen.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. It was a very big pleasure for me as a space enthusiast to talk the real astronaut. So thank you for coming here. And before I give audience the place, I would like to thank also the Open Society Foundation and the US Embassy to organize this event. And of course, thank you, our audience, for coming here. And I believe it was very nice and interesting event for all of us. So thank you again, Dorothy.
Thank you.
And please ask your questions.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. In microgravity, I heard that the sense of smell is kind of reduced. But still, I would like to ask you, does a space shuttle and the International Space Station have a specific smell? Something that you noticed when you entered or when you stayed there a longer time?
So when we first floated into the space station, we thought that the lab smelled like a laboratory kind of does on Earth. Like, not bad, but maybe a little musty, or like something is growing in your laboratory. So we noticed this smell, and it's quite possible that since the U.S. laboratory had been there for a long period of time, that perhaps it was growing something a little unknown. But the rest of the vehicle smelled really good, because like the JAXA module, the GEM module that the Japanese Space Agency had added was brand new. So it kind of had a brand new smell to it, very metallic and, very clean. And the same with the Columbus module, the European laboratory. Like, it had just been added too, so it was really clean and fresh. And it's just the older modules, like the U.S. lab, and then the Russian cargo module, where like all this cargo fills it up, so it's hard to get behind panels and make sure they're cleaned easily. So they had just a little bit of a smell, but I'm sure we probably smelled too, so I don't know.
Other question, please? I think there is one. Yeah.
Thank you. So I read that you also went on an underwater mission. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us some interesting facts about it and maybe compare and contrast it to your space mission.
Right. So I did get a chance to live underwater, 65 feet underwater at the Aquarius habitat, which is off of the Florida Keys. And it's kind of like a submarine, except that it has an open hole in the bottom that you go in and out of for spacewalks. And that's really what we were using it for. It's like a vehicle underwater. And of course, we train in water because it makes you neutrally buoyant. In this case, we were thinking about, like, how would you work at an asteroid? And so we set up this like obstacle course that was like our asteroids, and we had different tools that we could use. We got to wear jetpacks for some of it, but we discovered that wouldn't work very well to work at an asteroid with a jetpack, because you would like have to pulse in and then try to take a sample, which would force you back, and so you'd spend a lot of time pulsing and you'd waste all your fuel. So that wasn't very efficient. We also got to work with like submarines little individual submarines, and they were better because it was kind of like a small space vehicle that could hold an astronaut out in front of them, and they're very much more stable. So like a space vehicle that could hold an astronaut, and then you could work at the asteroid. So it was challenging. I really liked it. Of course, unlike space, but very rewarding, was to see big barracudas or turtles or, different creatures go swimming by while you're operating. That doesn't happen in the neutral buoyancy lab, so that was pretty cool. And it gave me a chance to become a helmet diver. I had only been a scuba diver before that, but I learned how to helmet dive. And like that helicopter video that I showed, another of my least favorite moments was you actually have to flood the whole helmet and get it full of water and then purge it out. And it's a reminder that you don't need to panic, that you'll be fine if your helmet gets full of water. But it's still very uncomfortable for those few seconds. So it's just remembering that even through discomfort, you'll eventually get comfortable. And then like the whole time was really rewarding. I would put space here and the underwater mission right there. They were both awesome.
Many questions?
Well, I got a mic, so I'm gonna ask. I'd like to ask you about your body shape changes when you came back to Earth. How did you feel? And the next couple of weeks, if you noticed some changes.
Right, so a lot of things happen to your body when you go to space. Some of the first things, your heart starts to atrophy because it doesn't have to work hard. Here on Earth, blood is always trying to flow from our head, and the heart is always trying to keep it up at our head, and that puts a lot of load on the heart. But when you get to space, it's super easy for the heart to pump blood to your head. So it atrophies, and also it tells your body that you don't need as much blood volume, and so you actually lose some of your blood volume. That's a change. If you don't exercise regularly, especially for those crewmates that live up there for 6 months, then your leg muscles would also atrophy and your bones would start to reabsorb. But thankfully, we've built like a really good treadmill, exercise cycle, and then also a resistive device where it looks like you're lifting weights, but you're really pulling against a dashpot or a vacuum, and it makes you very strong. But if you didn't do that, you would lose the bone and muscle. And then some eye changes have also been noticed to happen, and we're trying to learn more about why there's this interocular pressure with our long-duration space flyers. So yes, there's all these changes, and yes, when you come back to Earth, you can tell that your body has changed. Some of the immediate part is if you feel weak getting out, but you notice that you can't walk as straight easily, and that's because your inner ear, your neurovestibular system, is like a little bit confused. It's not used to being in gravity, but it comes back pretty quickly. The things that take a little bit more time is like regaining that bone density. Even with all that exercise, there's still going to be some bone loss. So there's regaining that and regaining your blood volume. Yeah, that takes some time too. But you feel pretty good within the first day back, and you continue to feel better as time goes by.
Hi. I would like to ask about one topic we haven't talked about the whole evening, and it's actually politics, and how much does, I would say, like recently President Trump signed the bill for NASA, and how important is this support of political systems for the space programs? I mean, there has been Cold War which pushed the space programs very far, and I would like to know your opinion about this part of the story as well.
Yeah, well, part of funding NASA is actually kind of removed from the changes, but also involved in the changes. So funding comes from, of course, our taxes, and there's a lot of public support for NASA even as the years go by. Like, there's a fascination with space. We don't get funded the way we did during the Apollo days. That was like a lot more funding, but we also don't lose funding. And so presidents tend to support NASA. I kind of like to think of it as like our better selves. Like, we have always been involved since the Cold War with Russia, and that's been important because, you know, in space we work together as friends and colleagues, and while on Earth we may struggle and not agree, we're able to do things and accomplish things as scientists. And I think I like the way The Martian shows that, how the scientists come together and step in to get things done, and then you can work it out later with politics. So I kind of like to think of it that way. We've had over 86 different countries represented on the International Space Station. That's a really big deal. I mean, science from all around the world has taken place up there. And so, again, I like to think of it as our better selves and a place where we don't draw a boundary at a module and say, like, you can't come into my module and do work. Instead, it's like, I'm going to work on this project, and it's for some country, and you come work on this, and we work together. I think that's really important.
I would like to ask you about these travels to the moon. How is it possible that the last almost half century there are no more travels to the moon? Is there nothing more to explore, or just these technologies are? Because I think the technologies now are far more better than 50 years ago when people were traveling to the moon.
So why there were no more missions to the moon? It was very expensive, and when we didn't even finish out all of the missions that we had built vehicles for, and so those Saturn V rockets and Apollo capsules are now in museums across the United States. And it was expensive, and we made the shift to do work in low Earth orbit, and some of that was really important, like having the Hubble Space Telescope and the Kepler and satellites and building the International Space Station. All of that couldn't have happened without the space shuttle. But it did, of course, like I said, you can't fund an Apollo type of work at the same time as the shuttle type of work. It's too expensive. So if we're going to do a lot of work, it's important, I think, to do international cooperation, because these missions that would go to Mars, I don't think that one country can necessarily provide all of the support. It's just, there's a lot of technology that needs to happen. So like having the European Space Agency, which is good at a lot of important technology, if they do one aspect, and then if NASA does another aspect, and JAXA, and if we do these international cooperations, then we can probably do a lot more together, and more people involved, more support. That's better than just individually. But yeah, it was difficult to do both, and it's not that the moon's not interesting. Like I said, geologists would love to continue, and so would engineers and rocket scientists, because the moon is a great test bed. But it's just deciding like where to put your money, and if the ultimate end goal is Mars, when do you just decide, let's just go to Mars? Like, maybe we don't need this test bed. So it's hard to say.
I think just yesterday, NASA and Roscosmos, the Russians, signed the agreement about the moon station. It will be some kind of deep space gateway, so maybe this is the first step. Yeah.
Do you have any secrets about space that you can tell us because of NASA or something like that?
No, another good thing about space is that it's pretty open for the public. It's publicly funded, so the videos and the pictures that we take are given to the public so that they can be utilized. The only thing that doesn't go directly to the public right away is like the technological information that we develop. Of course, some of that is because of patents, and some of it is because the actual research needs to go to scientists for them to process before they publish their data. And then people can have access to the data they got from their experiments. So that's a really nice thing about NASA, is that it is for the public.
Can't all people go to space?
Can tall people go to space? Yes, tall people can go to space. You should ask some of those. Like I'm thinking of my friend Bobby Satcher. He was a pretty tall guy. Scott Altman was a very tall commander of the last Hubble mission, STS-125. So yes, there's been some pretty tall people in space who were at one time told they might be too tall to fly in space. So I think it goes to show that you should not let people tell you. You should try and try and try, and then, you know, be successful like they were too.
Can I ask one question? What was your first dream job? It was astronaut or actress or just like these professions?
You know, I never really had like the wanting to be an actress. I did really want to be an astronaut. I thought a lot about being a teacher because, of course, both my parents were teachers. So I thought about that. And, of course, I ended up becoming a teacher. So that was a good thought. And, I thought at one time, you know, I would like to be a pilot as well. And so I got to fly airplanes, but I still might have to get an airplane license. So, I had lots of jobs. At one time, I was a pretty good runner. I really wanted to be a really good runner, but there's just some things that you can't be the best at, and I was not the best runner, but I was an okay runner.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, how do you go to bathroom in the space?
Yes. How do you go to the bathroom in space? So let's go back to that picture so I have something I can point to. Because it's actually pretty interesting. Uh-oh. Whoops, where'd it go? Maybe it'll go back? Well, if it doesn't go back, then the way you go to the bathroom is in space is carefully, because you can make a big mess. But let's see. We're almost there. So close. One more slide. There we go. Okay. So every toilet on the space station has a hose that has a suction, and on top of that hose is a funnel. And so, of course, you use the funnel and you urinate into it, and then the urine gets sucked in. Now, what happens after that is different. On the space shuttle, it just was collected into a big tank, and if the tank got too full, we had a point that we would open up a little hatch, and it sprays out into space, and it makes like really pretty ice crystals, and then it goes away. But we don't do that anymore, because on the space station, we have kind of a closed loop cycle. So as I like to say it, today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee, is the next day's coffee. Yes, so what really happens on the space station is that it gets collected into a water tank and then sent to a water separator, which separates like the salty brine from the liquid. And then the liquid, it gets purified, and it's probably even cleaner than the drinking water that we have in front of us, which is very clean. And you get to drink it again. But also some of that water becomes electricity. We split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and through electricity, internet, and so we breathe the oxygen. The hydrogen combines with the carbon dioxide through the Sabatier, so we are able to recycle and make more water, makes more oxygen through the electrolysis process. So that is how you do the urine portion. The solid portion is not as exciting. Like the solid in this case just went into below into like just like a tank as well, with a little door so that nothing floats away. And it has a very small hole that allows it to actually vent to space, so there's no bad smells, and it freeze dries it, the poop. It's not the same on the space station. On the space station, you go to the bathroom into a little bag that's underneath, and then you seal up the bag so it doesn't smell, and then you put a glove on your hand and you push all this down so that you can maximize room, and eventually it fills up this kind of big silver tank, and it goes into a Progress vehicle, and then as the Progress re-enters the Earth, it burns up and it becomes space dust, or atmosphere dust.
So here's a little less scientific question. During the time you were in space, did you have like a tiny panic attack where you got like afraid of space, or you like overthought the fact that you're in space? Because like many people are afraid of space, just like me.
I didn't have that type of moment, thankfully, but I did have a weird panic attack the day I got back from space. I was sleeping in my bedroom, and all of a sudden I woke up and I felt like I was like attached to the bed, and like I couldn't get out of bed, and I panicked that I was like really stuck on the bed. And then I realized, oh, I'm not stuck to the bed. Like, I get out of bed every day except for the 15 days that I was in space. So that was kind of my panic attack. But thankfully, when I was in space, like, it just felt so good. It never made me scared. Like, it's made me really interested or curious, or like I liked playing in it.
What if you get ill in the space?
What if we get ill in space? Well, we do have actual doctors that fly on some flights, but others of us have taken medical training at a hospital and learned how to do some more complicated procedures, like how to start IVs and how to do CPR for long periods of time, not just for short periods of time. And we've learned even how to do some minor dentistry, although thankfully no one's had to do that. And so we send a package that could kind of take care of people for a while. And then we also have where you can have these vehicles leave the space station in an emergency and bring a crew member back and get back to Earth pretty quickly. So we practice like those types of scenarios maybe once or twice in our simulations. And mostly the worst things that happen in space is that people get allergies because here, dust and pollen settles to the ground, but in space, like, dust is suspended throughout. And so, your nose is filtering a lot of things, including some fungus and stuff like that. And so sometimes it makes people kind of stuffy nose, or they get little rashes, sometimes, uncomfortable rashes. But that's about the worst part that we have. We specifically do a quarantine so people don't get like the flu or colds or things like that. Yeah.
Next question. I would like to ask, when you return home to the Earth and you enter the atmosphere, if you're afraid of something because that enter is very dangerous. And the second question is about stars, and when you look to the black of the space, if you see something different than you see in Earth, so if it is a different view.
Well,
Thanks.
so yes, re-entering Earth is like, it does make you feel pretty vulnerable and a little, like I felt the first time a little bit scared just because we knew that we lost Columbia at this point, and you actually see plasma outside the windows, like you're seeing this orange glow. So you know why you see that, and it makes you really realize like those tiles and the way that vehicle is designed and is flying is right on the edge of death as well. So for a little bit of time while that lasts, it can be a little bit scary. I guess what is helpful is that you have a job to do, and so if you think about your job more than that, it kind of takes away from the scariness. And then the second piece, looking at the stars. So in the bright light, in the sunlight, you can't see the stars because the sun overwhelms, and it also reflection off the Earth's atmosphere is just like so bright. So you don't see stars then. But you do get the most amazing view of stars when you go into the darkness behind the Earth and you don't have the sun shining on you. And it's kind of overwhelming because here on Earth, we only see like the brightest stars, especially in cities like Bratislava. And so it was like, wow, I don't even know what constellations I'm looking at. And, you know, as an amateur astronomer, I tend to know quite a lot of constellations. So that was like surprising to me, but it's really beautiful. And the colors, like stars do have colors, you know, because of temperature. And you're able to see that a little bit of color, which I think is neat. And then the Milky Way, like just like, it seems bigger and thicker because you are actually able to see more of it. So I thought it was really, really beautiful.
One more from me. So basically, I would like to comment on another topic, which is women in space. Obviously, there's Peggy Whitson, who has now set the record for time being in space. There's Samantha Cristoforetti, who is really important for the European Space Agency, and many, many other important female astronauts. And I would like you to comment maybe on the importance of females in space.
Yeah, well, I think it was really important, like, to have, of course, Valentina Tereshkova fly as the first female. And then it took 20 years, but finally they flew Sally Ride. And in Sally's class, they hired 7 women. And those 7 women made a huge difference for the next generation of women. And they continue to give and give through support and making sure things went forward better for next groups. So I think we see in the new classes of astronauts being hired that there is almost an equal representation of men and women. And I think that's starting to show too, like in the amount of engineers that we have in NASA. And also it's important that we have the story like the Hidden Figures movie, because these are people that really were there since the beginning, and yet we didn't tell those stories. And I think that was to our detriment, because we lost like generations of young girls that maybe would have gone into the math and sciences, but they didn't even know that this was possible. So I think it's great that like we are hiring more and supporting, and that men and women are working alongside each other, just like we're down here on Earth, like what we're doing. And it may not ever be completely equal in all fields. I don't think that's really the goal. I think the idea is to make sure that we celebrate everyone doing their best jobs in the things that they're passionate about, because when you're interested and passionate about something, you tend to do a much better job. So to stop saying, oh, that job is only for women or that job is only for men, but to say, you know, oh, it's great that you want to be a male nurse, and oh, it's great that you want to be a female engineer. Like, that's great. We need both of you doing both of those things. So, yeah.
Okay. There was 4 women on the onboard space station during your mission. Is this some kind of space record?
Yes, we did set a record for having 4 women in space. It was just a chance record, because originally we were not supposed to arrive when Tracy Caldwell Dyson was on orbit. Originally we were supposed to be earlier before she arrived, but our mission slipped, and so she arrived, and then we were there as well. And again, I think that shows like these that it doesn't need to even be a record. Like, we were already working hard, and all of us were doing our jobs, and so we set a record, but it's just because we were all doing our jobs and doing them well, and it was just a chance. Well, oh yes, go ahead.
How do you sleep in space?
Yes, we have like some pretty cool sleeping bags. You need to attach them to a wall so you won't float into your buddy or get stuck somewhere. But you float into your sleeping bag and you slip your arms into it, and they actually kind of float out. It looks kind of funny, but that's how you look, like a cocoon with like arms. And you sleep pretty well because your body's not putting pressure on anything, so it just fully relaxes, your muscles aren't strained or anything. This is a wonderful sleep, some of the best sleep I've ever had. People asked if I remembered dreams in space, and I was like, no, I just slept and slept. It was really good. So that's how we sleep in space.
Last questions? Yeah?
So I've got a question about how it is about up and down in space, because you are flying and you don't have a Earth to say this is down, this is up, so how it is there?
Right. So up and down becomes like a human construction, and for orientation we do label things like deck and overhead and starboard and port, and we do this because of naval directions, but it's really purely for knowing where to stow things. I made a point of like eating on the ceiling because why not? It's the only time I'll get to do it. And so it's really purely like a construction, and it doesn't matter. You can eat on the ceiling, on the floor, on the wall. It's pretty fun. I just want to say thank you so much. It's been awesome to be here with you guys this evening, and what a lovely place to share a conversation and hear your questions and share my experiences with you. And thank you for being so welcoming to Bratislava as well. Thank you.